Welcome to me, where suspenseful, thrilling, and mysterious stories will draw you into a world where the lines between reality and fantasy seem to blur. When the night falls, when all the sounds gradually quiet down, leaving only your own heartbeat and breathing, that's when these stories begin. Tensions, unsolved mysteries, moments that will make you hold your breath in fear or curiosity, all are waiting for you ahead. Find a comfortable seat, dim the lights, and let this sound guide you on a journey that is not for the faint of heart. I want each of you to leave a comment sharing where you are in the world. And if you are enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel now. Relax. Are you ready? If so, join me in the first story right now. Wing Woman. God, I hate flying. I look out the window of the 747, so foolishly boarded in my rush to get cross-country as quickly as possible. We are flying through some dark clouds, so there is little to see. The old, familiar fear rises in the pit of my stomach as I try to push it back. I have to maintain myself. Don't start to panic. Nothing's going to happen. I try to flood myself with calm, even as I'm white-knuckling the armrest. The 4 Jack Daniels I had before the flight aren't working. The plane is shaking a little bit. I get it. I am a nervous flyer myself. The stranger next to me smiles reassuringly, but her voice doesn't sound nervous at all. I never liked it and avoid it whenever I can. Cars or buses are safer. She chuckles. You do know that's not what they say. Who says? The experts, of course. You can't trust them. What makes them experts anyway? My face feels raw and flushed. Am I turning red? Well, they say flying is much safer than driving. Thousands dead every year from cars, but no fatal plane crashes in the United States for several years now. She's trying to calm me, but I've heard it all before. Don't believe a word. I know. I've heard all of that. But it just takes one plane to crash, and over 100 dead, just like that. What if it's this plane? I can feel it shaking. Is my voice trembling? I don't want her to notice and think I'm a coward. Hell, I am afraid. It's embarrassing for her to see it. Her face shows concern. Or is it contempt? I'm not sure. She's middle-aged, but still in good shape. And pretty. It's all right. Don't worry. Planes do all kinds of different things in flight. A little shaking is perfectly normal. I fly quite a bit, and no. You must think me a real loser for being so frightened, and you're so calm. Oh, I'm not calm, just a good actress. She teases. What's your name? Charles? But my friends call me Charlie. Well, Charlie, I'm Rachel. But my friends call me Rachel. She smiles and extends a slender hand. Because my hand is sweaty and a little shaky, I hesitate momentarily to return her handshake, but overcome my reluctance. She doesn't seem to notice or care about the condition of my hand. Where are you headed? I ask. To Dallas. I have a job in marketing, so I do a fair amount of traveling. But I still understand the nervousness. Never feel quite calm till the plane touches down and stops moving. I can't tell you are nervous at all. Like I said, Charlie, I'm good at acting the part of a calm, cool, and in-control flyer. Perfected the part, you might say. How about you? Where you headed? Family crisis. My mom is in bad shape, and I have to head to a small town about 100 miles outside of Dallas and get there quickly. Otherwise, I'd never be on this death trap. I smile, trying to make a little joke of my fear. Sorry to hear that, Charlie. I hope she gets well soon. So do I. But the doctors say the odds are against her. So this might be my last visit. I have to tell myself that as long as there is life, there's hope. God, I'm sorry. I lost my father about a year ago. It's horrible to go through. Our conversation is interrupted by a few particularly bigger bumps than the previous ones. After the shaking stops, her demeanor seems to change, and she sounds a little different when she resumes talking. Charlie, I feel bad for you. Not only are you having to deal with your mom's illness, but then you have to brave this shaky flight. I thought you said a little shaking was normal. Well, a little shaking at times is normal. She gets a little closer to me and lowers her voice a bit. However, to be truthful, this flight is a little more bouncy than usual. But I'm still not that concerned yet. What happened to projecting the fearless businesswoman? My fear level is rising again. Sorry. I guess I just feel more comfortable with you. I usually sit next to people who are totally fearless. They will hide stoically through the bumpiest of flights, showing no emotion, while I am churning inside, but still projecting my calm exterior. But with you, I can be real. It's liberating. Her slightly moist hand finds mine and squeezes it slightly. It's comforting to have a fellow passenger reveal her inner anxiety to me. We are companions in fear, friends of anxiety. Don't worry. It's nice to know I'm not the only one. Sometimes I feel that I can't even talk about it without people giving me all the statistics about how safe flying is and how foolish my concerns. I smile at her. Our inside joke. She softly laughs. You got me, Charlie. I was overcompensating, I guess. What can I say? Hope you don't think I am a pure hypocrite. Hypocrite? Heaven forbid. Just a good actress. Oh my, Charlie. Flattery will get you everywhere, she bravely says, but her hand pressure gives her away. More ups and downs, and more bumping now. Worse than anything before it. Quickly, the fasten seat belt's lamp comes on, and the captain's voice comes over the loudspeaker, telling us we are experiencing a little unexpected turbulence, but there is nothing to worry about. Talk about acting. Do these guys train in how to project a confident and reassuring voice? Or what? I'm not believing him at all. There's got to be something wrong. Otherwise, why the seatbelt light and message from the captain? Why the ever-increasing bumping? The engines don't sound right at all. This isn't how engines should sound. Are they cutting out? Losing power? Are we losing altitude? I look over at Rachel. There is fear in her face now. Our sweaty hands are in a death grip. I'm so glad she's here with me. The above story ends, but the suspense and thrill have never stopped. Right here is another equally interesting story. Please continue listening. I met Death last night, being alone in one of London's many streets. I was already cold, but his presence behind me was more than that. It was ice. Sharp, hard ice that seared through my flesh, traveled through my blood, urging goosebumps to shoot out of my skin. When I turned down the lonely alley, I regretted it instantly. It was said that he lingered in dark streets, waiting for a desperate soul to pass him by. But still, I had decided to keep going. Arriving in London on the night of my sister's birthday was already fine, but her party had begun at 8 p.m., and I didn't need to look at my watch to know that it was way past that already. She would kill me for being late. So late. But that wasn't the only reason I dared not turn back. It had been too long since I'd last walked these streets, since I'd last felt the heavy air of London pressing down on me, clogging my lungs with soot and smoke. Life on the road had made me lighter, more restless, but coming back here was like stepping into a grave. The city had a way of sinking its teeth into you, of making you forget where you'd been and why you'd left. Fearing death was childish. My parents had told me as such when I refused to go on one of the rides at the festival extravaganza during our trip to America. But this was different. Like the images in my mind of falling from great heights and being trampled by horses had cleared, revealing something so impossible that it was the only thing my mind deemed plausible. He was behind me. I did not turn around. I did not blink. My eyes remained open, forgetting how dry they had become. I just stood there, an invisible force stopping my feet from taking off into a run, from sprinting around corners and through streets until he would inevitably catch me. I wondered what it would feel like. A sudden pain in my chest, a fog corrupting my mind. My vision slowly dimmed until I drifted off into a never-ending, dreamless sleep. Or maybe I would feel nothing. Maybe I would be awake 1 second, thinking of all the ways I was going to die, and the next I would be lying on the ground, waiting for someone to find me. Although by then, it would be too late. No one could ever be saved. The goosebumps grew larger as his presence sauntered towards me, like prey waiting for the predator, knowing that it was neither fast enough nor strong enough to face it. I thought about all those moments I had let slip through my fingers, all those opportunities I had missed out on, all those potential friends, and more that I had hung back from, thinking that I wasn't worth their time. Now, I thought that I should have chosen who was worth my time, for it was going to be shorter than anyone would have expected. And who would have blamed them for thinking I had all the time in the world? I always thought, never did. Always calculated, never acted. Always worried about others, and never spared a thought for myself. Now, just like then, I waited. He was as silent as the night. The once cawing crows and hissing cats were already in mourning. He stood right behind me, dark as a shadow. His breath, a gentle breeze against my neck. The single word spoken in a voice rich in charm, alluring me to turn around, to face the predator, but I did not turn around. Still, I did not blink. The feeling in my fingers came back, and I was met with the warmth of coming out of an ice bath into the blazing sun. My feet began to move, the invisible force gone like it was never there. And soon I was running through winding streets, trying to think of anything but what had just happened. I'm late, I thought. I'm so late. And my sister will be mad. I tried to convince myself that was why I was running. Nothing happened. I saw nothing. My breath tore through the night's air as my book struck the slick cobblestones. Gas lamps fought against the choking fog, blinding me. The stray hairs that I had forgotten to shave on my arms stood up as ice invaded my lungs once more. No, please no. I had heard people talk about terror whipping through them, causing them to panic and shake. But that was a lie. Terror didn't come all at once. It came in waves, each one bigger than the last, freezing my lungs and clenching my throat in a vice-like grip. Why did I think that I could outrun him? Why did I think I could outrun the inevitable? I looked down at my pale skirts, now splattered in mud, and refused to look up again. The shock of what I might see would kill me before he did. He made no sound as he approached for the second time. No footsteps, no shift of breath or fabric. Just the sudden, certain sense of him standing before me. Close, too close. My eyes stayed down. I could feel him watching me, the weight of his gaze pressing against my skin like the brush of fingertips. My breath hitched. My fingers curled into the folds of my dress. He said nothing. He did nothing. Just stood there, silent and motionless. The seconds stretched and broke. My pulse thudded in my throat, like the fear in my stomach, mixing with something warmer, darker beneath my ribs. I imagined what his eyes must have been like. Dark, unblinking, tracing the line of my collarbone and the curve of my mouth. Then, just as quietly as he had come, he left for the second time in a single hour. Slowly, cautiously, I dared to lift my head. The street was empty again, mist curling through the dim light. I waited for what might have been seconds or minutes. I didn't know. But I managed to walk again. But I didn't run. I no longer cared that I was late. Finally, I reached it. A tall iron gate, its surface slick with rain that I hadn't realized was falling. A footman in a crisp coat stood at attention beneath a gaslight's feeble glow, his face blank under the brim of his hat. His eyes sharpened when he saw me. Without a word, he pushed the gate open, allowing me to slip through. The moment the gate clicked shut behind me, the street's grim chill seemed to dissolve. A long, white, gravel path wound through manicured gardens, lit by golden candles and strung by iron posts. Tall windows loomed over me as music floated through the air. As soon as I made it into the house, I passed the polished wood and gilded mirrors, up the stairs to the spare bedroom where I flopped onto the well-made bed, ignoring the state of my clothes. Did I feel bad for leaving my sister on her birthday? Of course, but I just couldn't cope with anyone or anything. I didn't think I could even fall asleep, no matter how much my body craved it. I had spent so long moving from place to place, never staying long enough to leave a mark, never bothering to make ties. I told myself it was because I liked the freedom, the open road, the thrill of waking up in a new city with new faces. But the truth was simpler. It was easier not to care when you knew you wouldn't stay long enough to lose anything. I met death last night, and I lived. Let's continue with the next, no less thrilling stories. The night the engines died. The passengers of Flight 227 had just completed their meal. The cabin buzzed quietly with the clinking of silverware, an intermittent laugh, and the faint sound of rustling newspapers. Ordinary, routine sounds that masked behind the fragile facade of safety the horror that loomed just beyond. A stewardess laughed at a joke told by a passenger. A man in first class swirled his wine, enjoying the final sip. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life, its static sibilant as a snake wrapping its way around the unwitting passengers. Then the voice, calm, deliberate, but with an unnatural solemnity, as if the captain was reading his own obituary. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. A moment of silence, just enough time for apprehension to germinate. I need to inform you of an issue. The words hung in the air, like an executioner's blade, poised to drop. The atmosphere changed instantly, as though an unseen presence had blown a chilly breath over the cabin, permeating every crack and crevice, wrapping around each traveler like invisible fingers clenching into a fist. Talk stalled, laughter died, to be succeeded by tense silence, as though the whole aircraft had sucked in its communal breath. The pilot went on, his voice strained with shame, but shaking under the burden of the nightmare he had created. In my hurry to leave Charles de Gaulle Airport, I failed to adequately monitor our fuel levels. A long, ragged pause ripped through the intercom, as though he was fighting to get out the words. I am ashamed to say this. I know I have let you all down. A hollow, uncomfortable silence fell over the cabin, choking the air like an invisible hand squeezing against each chest. The pilot paused to catch his breath before continuing, his voice cracking under the strain. Since we have been flying for a long time, our destination could be beyond our reach, since we may lack sufficient fuel to get there. The finality of his confession hit the passengers like a physical blow, drawing the air out of the cabin as though the aircraft itself had inhaled a gasp of horror. Some cried out loud. Others were paralyzed, their hands clenching armrests so hard that their knuckles whitened, as though through sheer force of will they could halt the unstoppable. A man grasped at his chest, his breathing shallow and fast, the first spasms of fear gripping his heart. The aircraft, once a sanctuary of order and technology, was now a prison of uncertainty. A metal coffin cutting through the emptiness at 500 miles an hour. Every flashing light, every jolt of turbulence seemed to foretell disaster. The whispers of fear were growing louder, building into a jarring buzz of terror. There were no strangers then, just the doomed, held together by the unspoken grasp of fear as they spoored toward some unknown destiny. And then another violent and convulsive shudder that ripped through the aircraft as if it had been seized in a death grip by an invisible hand. One of the engines coughed, sputtered, and died. The whole plane shuddered as if it had been hit by an invisible blow. A jolting crash of bone that threw passengers from their seats and sent loose objects flying through the cabin. The sickening lurch sent drinks crashing, trays falling to the floor, and overhead lockers bursting open, their contents spilling into the aisle. Gasps turned to screams as the cabin tilted, the aircraft going into an unnatural descent. The aircraft had already started to descend to New York, but now it was plummeting, no longer descending in a controlled manner, but spiraling out of control. The cabin lights flickered madly, casting crazed shadows on faces paralyzed with terror. The aircraft lurched violently, its damaged fuselage objecting to the stress. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like ghostly apparitions, dangling inertly amidst the chaos. The cabin erupted into pandemonium. Screams of abject terror, cries for assistance, the raspy howls of those who recognized the inevitable. The night sky outside, once an endless expanse of stars, and silence, now pressed in like the walls of a closing tomb. The vastness had turned suffocating, a cosmic void ready to consume them. Below, the earth was no longer a distant haze, but a giant, looming thing, reaching out to snatch them with an appetite that threatened to consume them. City lights unfurled like streaks of flame, oblivious to the souls above, speeding towards their fate. The altimeter ticked down at a remorseless pace. The aircraft was still too far from New York City, its decreasing altitude a grim countdown, without reprieve. There were no longer any alternative airports, no deviations, just the relentless descent, and the understanding that hope was running through their fingers like sand in a gale. The cockpit was a maelstrom of confusion. Alarms screaming, warning lights flashing like a dying pulse. The aircraft strained against gravity, shuddering so violently the control panels creaked. The first officer's white-knuckled fists held tight to the yoke, his forehead beaded with sweat. His voice, strained and almost lost in the din of automated warnings, sliced through the chaos. The second engine coughed, sputtered, and with a final agonizing splutter, died in silence. A jolting stillness filled the cockpit, broken only by the otherworldly shriek of wind whistling past the fuselage. It was the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, deafening in its absence of power. A stillness that presaged catastrophe. The aircraft, a marvel of controlled engineering, was now reduced to a huge metal husk, a crippled glider flying through the darkness. The control panels blacked out, their frantic warnings muted, as if even the plane itself had given up. The first officer's breath caught, his fists still gripped on the dead yoke, as if sheer willpower could urge power back into the engines. His eyes bulged wide, darting to the altimeter, its numbers free-falling with heart-stopping speed. The first officer's knuckles turned white on the throttle. "We're dead stick. No thrust." The captain's mind reeled. "We can glide this in." His voice, which he tried to keep steady, trembled. He was not sure. It seemed to take forever for the ram air turbine to deploy, its little turbine opening up into the howling wind like a desperate, last gasp prayer to the emptiness. Inside the cabin, the flight attendants strode down the aisles with stiff formality, their faces drawn but determined. Their voices, strained as they were, carried the authority of rehearsed command. "Brace for impact, please," one of them screamed, her voice hardly cutting through the noise. A few passengers complied at once, throwing themselves forward, arms clasped around their heads. Others were paralyzed, their brains locked in denial, unable to comprehend the unimaginable. One man struggled with his seatbelt, shaking so hard he couldn't locate the buckle. A woman clutched the armrest so hard her fingernails cracked on the plastic. The emergency lights strobed feebly, casting eerie shadows that twitched on faces contorted in terror. People shrieked, a loud, grating cacophony of terror. Some embraced their loved ones. Others slapped hands over their faces, screams muffled by the deafening quiet of the plummeting plane. A flight attendant, holding onto the back of a seat for balance, mouthed frantic reassurances no one heard. The aircraft vibrated heavily, the fuselage complaining in protest to the strain of its powerless plummeting. Unsecured items flew around the cabin, bouncing off chairs and people. Each passing second seemed impossibly long, as if the fabric of time itself had rent asunder under the threat of disaster. The captain gritted his teeth, his hands trembling over the controls. The glide of the plane was erratic, its path a hardly controlled plunge into the emptiness. The cockpit echoed with alarms, relentless, screaming their warnings in a cruel mockery of hope. Smoke from the failing systems wreathed through the dim light, the acrid scent of burning circuits searing his lungs, and then, out of the spinning darkness, out of the turmoil, he saw it, a faint, glimmering glow in the distance, cutting through the blackness like a sliver of salvation. New York City, runway lights, a fragile lifeline quivering in the fog, teasingly distant. But could they reach it? Or was it an illusion, a mirage in the final few seconds before extinction? The first officer's breath caught, his heart racing in his throat, as his eyes locked onto the gleaming light ahead. We might make it, after all, he whispered, his voice trembling with a faint, desperate hope, as though saying the words aloud could make it so. But beneath his words was the unspoken fear, the knowledge that they were still at the mercy of gravity, the wind, and fate itself. But they hadn't reached there yet. The trees rose like shattered black shapes, their gnarled branches reaching out greedily toward the plane, as if to pull it down into nothingness. He had seconds. His grasp of the yoke was vice-like, his knuckles white under the faint glow of the flickering gauges. The plane bucked in an irregular motion that was wild, turbulence and gravity resisting every movement. His heart throbbed in his head, but his mind was fixed in steel-sharp concentration. The first officer took a deep breath. Hold it just a little longer. The branches on top of the trees were closing in. The runway lights continued to flicker ahead, teasingly near, yet impossibly distant. They were on the brink of salvation or doom. One last risk, one last wild maneuver. With a violent tug on the controls, he went for the gap. The tops of the trees scraped the underside of the plane, ripping at the undercarriage. The sound of metal on wood screamed through the cabin, and then a deafening, bone-crushing bang. A merciless cacophony of screaming metal and bursting steel, as if the heavens themselves had fallen. The force of impact vibrated through the fuselage, seats ripped from their mounts, bodies tossed around like dolls, flames licked along the broken edges of the aircraft, illuminating the darkness in an otherworldly, flickering glow. A choking cloud of smoke rolled through the wreckage, its acrid grip tightening around every strangling breath of air. The ground trembled with aftershocks, debris still creaking and groaning in the burning wreckage. Then, silence. A fragile, unnatural silence, shattered only by the crackles of fire and the rough, strained breathing of those who remained alive. There were cries from the rubble, some in the distance, some close, bare with pain and shock. The reek of smoldering petrol clung to the air, a bitter reminder of how close they had come to complete destruction. And when the smoke finally cleared, the twisted remains of the plane lay stretched out like a broken, tortured thing, its bare skeleton scarcely discernible as the great ship that it once was. And yet, despite all the odds, everyone was alive, poised between the salvation and oblivion, balanced on the brink of an impossible second chance. The captain, bruised and inexplicably alive, gasped as he released his harness, his sweat-soaked fingers shaking with aftershock. His ribs throbbed with searing pain, every breath a burning reminder of the savagery they'd just survived. He hauled himself up, vision fading, the metallic flavor of blood in his mouth. The debris lay before him like the scene of a nightmare. Flames licking across scorched metal. The bitter taste of fuel and smoke choking the air. Remote, tortured screams resounded in his mind, together with the ringing that had not stopped since impact. His head reeled, replaying every mistake, every warning he had ignored. The sign of his failure weighed upon him, more oppressive than the wreckage that enclosed him. He had made a mistake that should have killed everyone. And the next story will be told right away. Please listen carefully. Master of Puppets. Io sono il padrone, e tu sei il burattino. I am the master, and you are the puppet. Working in an antique store was hardly where Aislinn saw herself 5 years ago. But beggars couldn't be choosers in this economy. Her dreams of becoming someone had been crushed by the reality of life and the collapse of her support system after college, and she depended on this job to make ends meet. Still, something was charming about the Raven's wares, even if she did encounter some characters from time to time. Her cousin often asked her if she had ever felt spirits or weird energy working around the real skulls, the old Victorian dolls, or the taxidermy of the Raven, that gave the store its name. Like everyone in the town, Iceland had heard horror stories about the objects sold from this place. A man bought a doll for his daughter, and they all vanished without a trace a week later. A woman bought a pretty ring and died in a freak accident with the ring on her finger. Someone bought an old statue and fell down their stairs. The truth was, Iceland didn't believe in those sorts of things. Ghosts, ghouls, or energies. Sure, the place was creepy if you worked late alone on long winter nights, but it paid the bills. Those horror stories were coincidences. Plenty of people had purchased items from the Raven's Wrath without an issue. Her cousin believed in that side of things so strongly. People whispered about her behind their hands. If Aislinn started believing, what would they say about their family? It was bad enough she worked here. The customers you never heard about were outsiders. A tiny voice in her head would whisper when she had this argument with herself. You've never followed up to check on what happened afterwards. She looked up from her phone when Eli barged their way back through the piles of antique junk piled around the place. A guy dropped off this painting today. I'm telling you, it's weird. Iceland knew that everything here was weird in one form or another. She once had someone try to offer a jar of real human teeth. That had been on her second day, and regrettably, it had not been her last strange experience. They jerked their thumb over their shoulder. It's out the back by the rocking horse. I need you to label it up before you leave tonight. Did he give any details? Nah, I'm surprised you didn't see him. Dark-haired guy, glasses, had some sort of accent. She vaguely recalled someone coming in of that description when she'd been restocking some old hardbacks and had directed him towards Eli at the back of the store. She wouldn't have thought of him again, save for the odd look in his dark eyes. I sent him to the back to see you. He had this look in his eyes, like he'd seen things, you know? I offered him a fair price, but he didn't even want the money. He just said to take it. He didn't want money? Iceland repeated slowly. That's a bit weird, don't you think? Maybe it came with bad memories or something. Eli shrugged. Just make sure to get it cataloged to go out on display. I've got to head off. I'll see you tomorrow. The afternoon was quickly fading, the air becoming colder and far less welcoming inside. The eyes of the raven on the desk seemed to watch her every move, and the gentle ticking of the antique clocks suddenly felt ominous. Even the shadows of the shelves seemed to be lengthening, reaching out in her direction. Iceland looked up from her book and paused. The store had fallen eerily silent. She felt her heartbeat increase as the hair at the back of her neck stood up. Hello? Why was she calling out? There was no one there. No one had entered the shop. The bell above the door had been silent for hours. A faint whisper seemed to be coming from the distance. Someone must have left the radio on in the storage room. She walked to the back of the store trying to ignore the feeling that the eyes of the dolls were watching her. It wasn't like her to be this paranoid. She pushed the door open wide and reached in to grab the portable radio the manager insisted on keeping around. Her hand found the handle and lifted it out. It was switched off. "Okay," she muttered, feeling a cold trickle of sweat run down her back. She set the radio down on an empty stool and worked away around the mountains of antiques to find the latest addition to the collection. Aisling pulled the sheet off slowly and recoiled. The painting was of a hanging puppet, clearly based on the original Pinocchio story. It's dressed in traditional clothes against a gruesome backdrop of bones and the occasional skull. The entire thing was bordered by a swirling blood red. A shudder ran down her spine as she took in all the gruesome details. The glass on the front was cracked, but that was hardly anything they couldn't fix. There was something odd about the break, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She turned the painting over to check the back of the frame and noticed a faded name on the back, too illegible to read, and an unmistakable bloody handprint. What the hell? The painting clattered to the floor as she reeled back, banging into a cabinet and screaming as the puppet hanging there swung into her face. Its painted smile seemed twisted into a cruel leer as she swatted it away, clutching at her chest. She took some calming breaths. She picked the painting up from the floor with shaking hands and turned it over, aware of her heart racing in her chest. There's no bloody handprint, only the faded marks of a name. "You're going mad," she muttered to herself. "You need to get out more." She carried the painting to the desk and started cataloging it, intrigued by the lack of an artist's mark. Even a quick Google search yielded no results, and after a few minutes, she brought it back to sit at the back by the dolls and puppets. She took a moment longer to stare at it and turned back to the front. There was a rocking horse in the middle of the aisle. No, that wasn't possible. She hadn't moved anything. "Hello?" she called out nervously. "This isn't funny now. Come out." When no one answered, she tried to focus. Maybe it had been there before, and she had simply walked past it, not noticing. Eli had said the painting was out the back by the rocking horse. For a moment, her cousin's voice echoed in her ear, though she tried to deny it. This was not the first time something like this had happened on her shift. Eli had laughed it off with her at the time, but she hadn't seen a bloody handprint last time. Eli had moved the horse. That's all there was to it. Aisling walked back to the front of the store and stared out at the street, across at the ordinary sight of the small local shop and the dress shop beside it. Maybe she needed a holiday. The radio started playing a Cure song. Had she turned it on? When had she brought it to the front? Suddenly, the dark shop seemed alien to her. No, now she was being stupid. She didn't believe in any of that stuff. A sudden tiredness overcame her as she sat back in her chair and started to doze, watching the cuckoo bird on the antique clock swing backwards and forwards, swinging, swinging. She could hear the distant, creaking sound of a rope and sobbing cries, growing louder and louder. Oh, how painful! How painful! Why wasn't I good? Something was hovering in the corner of her vision. Every instinct in her body screamed at her not to turn and look, to run away from that shadow. She turned her head and saw the puppet from the painting. It raised its head and leered at her. Puppets have no soul, but they do a lot of harm. Suddenly, she was the one battling with the rope as the puppet laughed and screeched over and over. I want to be real. I want to be real. I want to be real. Aislinn leapt up from her sleep, feeling the phantom rope around her throat. Every item in the shop was facing her. They seemed to be looming towards her, skulls echoing the cries of the horrific voice as it cried out over and over. Whatever sick joke this was, she wasn't playing anymore. She ran to the door and tried to haul it open. It was locked. The room seemed to darken, and the sound of the puppet's voice, distant at first, became unmistakable, growing clearer with each passing second. Its whispers now unmistakably directed at her. Oh, che male, che male. She picked up a metal poker and walked to where the painting sat. The voice was louder now, its desperate cries in both English and Italian piercing her ears. What the hell are you? The voices paused. You should let me out. You're just like me. You're a puppet too. Aislinn lifted the metal poker above her head. What? Are you? You should let me out, Aislinn. She tried to move away, but her back smacked into a large cabinet. What the hell are you? My last puppet didn't obey. He brought me here. Un burattino che non obbedisce finisce sempre male. A puppet who does not obey always ends badly. You should let me out. I've always been here, waiting for someone to let me out. She realized then what was wrong with the glass. Someone, something, was trying to break free from the inside. Her own reflection in the glass warped into a puppet's face, and she felt the weight of something choking her. No, she was not a puppet. She was a human. This wasn't real. I am the master of puppets. Puppets have no soul, but they do a lot of harm. I tried to take his soul, but he broke free. You will let me out. You are my puppet now. You saw it in the glass. You're like me. Aislinn watched in horror as the cracks in the glass grew wider. It will end badly for you if you do not obey. She lifted the poker to swing it, and the hands of the puppets on display reached out and grabbed her throat, pulling her backwards. A bad puppet is of no use to me. I have been waiting for you. There's nothing to be done. One must really die good. Aislinn screamed, trying to throw the puppets off. She twisted in their grip, seeing the cracks grow wider and wider. When you're not real, nothing hurts, Aislinn. But the more I try to be real, the more I feel pain. Oh, the pain. How painful this is. Can't you feel it? The creaking of the rope was unbearable. The spiraling voice wailing and wailing as she begged for this to stop, for her to wake up, to let this nightmare end. Aislinn woke in her chair. The clock read the same time as it had before, but something was different. Everything was different. At some point, the gentle light of the afternoon had faded into a gray gloom bordering on darkness. This day seemed to be lasting an eternity. It was all a nightmare, a terrible nightmare. She saw it then. Her vision narrowed, and her chest tightened as she stared at it. The painting, mocking her from the back, as it always had. Maybe this was still a nightmare taken new form. Those horrible skulls leering at her, that noise, that endless noise. She approached it slowly and ran her hands over the cracks in the glass, feeling her skin crawl with revulsion. The glass was cold, unnaturally cold, like it was sucking the little warmth she had left from her fingers. I want to be real, Aislinn. A voice whispered in her ear, you should let me out. I have waited so long. She grabbed the poker from where it lay on the ground and lifted it, bringing it down to strike the glass. A gloved hand reached out of the frame and snatched hold of her wrist, forcing her to drop the poker in shock. A puppet has no soul, but it can do harm. It cackled, drawing her closer to the frame. You're my puppet now. Your soul is mine. No! She screamed, grabbing at the nearest object, a porcelain bird, and throwing it at the puppet. You aren't real. None of this is real. She felt the world begin to blur and tried to pull away from its grip. But it was too late. This couldn't be it. This couldn't be how this ended for her. This wasn't fair. This wasn't fair. You aren't real, she cried as her mind began to break. You aren't real. She felt the rancid breath of the puppet as it whispered in her ear, and now neither are you. Just when you think all the weird stuff has been told, the next story will make you think again. The Yellow Truck. Man, $6 for an ice cream sandwich? Highway robbery. Jack squinted at the menu, slapped crookedly on the side of the bright yellow panel truck. Perry's Ice Cream. Everyone had a restaurant on wheels these days. Knockoffs of famous characters grinned back at him with their dead eyes. He knew the actual products would be a deformed, melted version of the picture, and he found the irregular eyeballs and melting smiles to be unsettling. A nice, plain ice cream sandwich would hit the spot. Excuse me. Hello. Though the sliding sales window was open, Jack saw no sign of a vendor, even though the speakers puked out a chiptune version of La Cucaracha at top volume. Are you going to take my money or what? The chill from the freezers seeped out from the window. Jack leaned in a little further, noting the container of ice cream sandwiches that could be easily opened from his vantage point. He looked as far into the truck as he could see, then checked over his shoulder to see if he had an audience. The neighbors could be so nosy. With no one in sight, Jack quickly snaked his hand into the window, opened the container, and grabbed hold of a coveted ice cream sandwich. "Should have been doing your job, ice cream man," he mumbled as he walked back to his house, mouth full of ice cream and perfectly soggy cookie. He casually tossed the wrapper into his neighbor Mrs. Crowley's yard. Mrs. Crowley was the sort of woman everyone assumed was a witch, and the local kids would egg her house each Halloween and dare each other to ring her doorbell and run. She was probably a very nice lady, but Jack didn't care enough to do anything about it. The yellow truck sat on the street outside Jack's house for hours, rotating through its jaunty but very limited playlist, which, Jack noted, recycled La Cucaracha far more than was probably necessary. Jack considered calling the police, but with his record and at least one warrant out for his arrest, he didn't want to call any attention to himself. Still, he was surprised that no one else in the neighborhood seemed to have called. In fact, no one else in the neighborhood even seemed to pay the truck any mind. The sky eventually darkened, and the street lights buzzed on. And finally, the truck shut off its pixelated musical loop and trundled away. As night settled in, Jack, not wanting to lose the sweet and ill-begotten taste of ice cream from his lips, didn't bother to brush his teeth before crawling into bed. His leg was missing. Jack searched around the house, tossing couch cushions and overturning tables, flinging plates and mugs from his kitchen cabinets, even checking behind the toilet just in case. But no leg. He licked his lips, tasting the smooth vanilla cream from his earlier treat. Jack's brain fought to make a connection between the ice cream sandwich and his missing leg, but the thoughts were foggy and nebulous. The opening notes of La Cucaracha floated into the room. Jack launched upward, sweat pouring from his face as he shook off the nightmare. He tasted the residue of the ice cream on his lips, then flung the clammy sheets off his body to make sure his leg was, in fact, still there. La Cucaracha played in the distance, just audible through his open window. At first, Jack was able to dismiss the music as a memory echo from earlier. But the music grew louder. He lurched out of bed and towards the window, stopping to wrap his robe around himself so the neighbors wouldn't get a peek at his genitals if they happened to be awake, and also looking directly at his house. The familiar yellow panel truck was slowly turning onto his street, music playing at a volume just loud enough for him to hear clearly, but still retain a dreamlike quality. Jack had the strangest feeling. The headlights were aimed directly at him as the truck crept towards his house, an inching pace that was almost sinister. It was far too dark to see if a driver was present this time, but Jack assumed there was one. Jack shut the window, muting the noise just a touch, and tried to get back to sleep. The song slithered into his ears and brain, worming around and preventing him from falling back to sleep. He promised himself that he would give the driver a stern talking to in the morning if the truck were still parked outside his house. As the sun started to peak over the horizon, the music finally died down, and Jack stood in the window, watching the panel truck slowly crawl down the street. He hadn't bothered to grab his robe this time, but the fog of sleeplessness had settled over his brain. More than 1 cup of bitter, black coffee was necessary to get him ready for the ride to work. Slower reactions would make the commute more dangerous, he thought, snapping on his bike helmet. He cursed his revoked driver's license, unsteadily mounted the bike, and started pedaling. At each red light, Jack took a generous swig out of his travel mug, and by the time he sat down at his desk, he was wired. The sheer amount of coffee he drank that morning had agitated Jack's stomach, so he was looking forward to having solid food by the time noon rolled around. A little something to absorb all that coffee. He walked to his favorite sandwich shop, a tiny hole in the wall, a block or so down from his office. It was a checkered tablecloth affair, plus an easily accessible tip jar and an oblivious cashier, so he almost always broke even. The welcome bell chimed merrily as Jack opened the door, but the chimes didn't stop when the door closed. He paused, listening, then realized the notes formed a song. La cucaracha increased in volume, steadily, and Jack was too busy frowning at the noise to notice when the hostess greeted him. Sorry. Table for one, he told her, and she walked him to a booth by the window. Jack started to sit, but realized he could see the bright yellow panel truck pull awkwardly into the parallel parking spot directly in front of the diner. He sprang back, an odd fear clawing at his chest. Maybe a different table, he said. The hostess shrugged and pointed him to a table near the kitchen. Jack slumped down in a chair that still let him see out the window. The menu, still as maddeningly crooked as before, was fully visible from this vantage point. And Jack noted that though the sales window was open, no one was manning the counter. So Jack couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as he ordered his lunch, chewed, drank, wiped his mouth with his flimsy paper napkin, paid at the counter, helped himself to the tip jar, and walked out the door. Every move soundtracked by the tinny tunes pumping out of the truck's speaker. No one had approached the counter to buy an ice cream the entire lunch hour. His muscles relaxed as he walked back to his building. The more the music faded with distance, the better he felt. He hadn't even noticed he was so tense. Jack rolled his neck around, rotated his shoulders, and was just about to reach the automatic doors to his office when he heard it again. The 8-bit notes of La Cucaracha increased in volume behind him, and he swung around, fists raised and heart beating rapidly. His boss, who had been walking up immediately behind him, backed up. "Whoa! Whoa!" Jack. Treating Jack like a panicked horse had, presumably, his boss's desired effect. And Jack put his fists down. "What's got you all spooked? Bad sandwich?" His boss chuckled and then breezed past Jack into the office. Still on the sidewalk, Jack caught a flash of yellow down the block. He didn't wait to see the truck this time and rushed inside. Jack was waiting, rather impatiently, to cross the street on his way home when a shiver ran up his spine. He looked over his shoulder, and his stomach seized. The yellow ice cream truck was also in line at the stoplight, just 3 car lengths away. It wasn't playing the music, but Jack thought he could hear it all the same. Jack wasn't completely sure that the truck was following him, specifically as he cycled through the neighborhood. But with each turn, he became more and more convinced. The truck kept a slow speed and stayed a modest distance behind his bike, far lower than the posted speed limit. He stopped at the cluster mailbox at the top of his street, mostly to check the mail, but also to see if the ice cream truck would keep driving. The truck slowed to a halt a few yards from the mailboxes, the staccato sounds still aggressively worming its way into Jack's brain. Jack fiddled with the mailbox key and took an unnecessary amount of time inspecting each piece of mail, even the junk. But the ice cream truck still didn't move. Jack stared directly at the driver's side of the windshield. It was so tinted that he was still unable to tell if anyone was in the driver's seat at all. He flipped the bird, just in case, and got back on his bike. As he started pedaling the short distance to his house, the truck started following again. A few houses down from his own, Jack heard the truck accelerate. His heart thumping, he quickly looked back to confirm that, yes, the ice cream truck was speeding up and heading his way. He checked his surroundings for a safe place to duck behind, but only Mrs. Crowley's rose bushes offered any sort of protection. He darted towards the bushes, abandoning his bike and hurling himself into the roses in one semi-graceful movement that would have made a movie stuntman proud. The thorns bit into his skin, and one scratched dangerously close to his left eye. The truck had missed him, but Jack heard the screech of brakes. Jack painfully extricated himself from the rose bushes, and the ice cream truck still idled in the road. La Cucaracha, blaring incessantly. The back door of the truck swung open with a creak. "Hey!" Jack yelled, wiping blood from his face, only to realize he also had blood on his hands and lots of other places because of the thorns. He lurched towards the back of the truck, his left leg dragging slightly. It would be bruised in the morning, he thought. "Hey, I'm talking to you, asshole!" Jack rounded the back of the truck and leaned on the open door. No one was inside. Through a narrow break in the curtains, Mrs. Crowley observed Jack as he yelled at the ice cream truck. He had always been an odd duck, that Jack. Terribly messy. And just the other day, he had been standing at his window in the middle of the night with only a robe on. She had almost seen his genitals. Mrs. Crowley couldn't make out exactly what Jack was yelling, but she imagined it was full of swearing. He started to lean into the open back of the truck, and then, in an instant, he was yanked inside. Before his legs made it all the way across the bumper, the doors of the truck slammed shut with such force that Jack's left leg was severed at the knee. The bloody leftovers dropped unceremoniously to the pavement and rolled to the curb, high-pitched notes of La Cucaracha distorted with static, and the truck shuddered violently. Mrs. Crowley took a tiny sip of her tea and watched the menu sign spin as the truck convulsed. With one last tremble, the truck stilled and the spinning sign stopped. The music had changed, and so had the sign's content. Perry's Hamburgers, it read. Still crooked, the truck slowly crept down the street, and she pinched her curtains shut. The above story is ended. Let's listen to the next story. Gridlock of the Mind. The 405 stretched endlessly before me, a vein of asphalt pulsing with the dull monotony of brake lights. Every morning, I merged into the current of half-conscious souls, each of us trapped in the same routine, inching forward to destinations we resented. My corporate job barely paid my bills, and my spirit eroded with each passing day. Yet, like a prisoner resigned to their cell, I got into my car every morning, hoping, futilely, that something, anything, would change. Today felt no different. The same stifling air, the same murmur of the radio, the same dull ache pressing behind my eyes. I stared ahead, watching as the red taillights blinked and glowed in a never-ending pattern, hypnotic in their rhythm. I sighed, my hands gripping the wheel. This wasn't life. This was something else, some cruel purgatory where change was an illusion. As I drove, a strange sensation washed over me, an unsettling tug at the back of my mind. It was faint at first, like the nagging feeling of forgetting something important. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Had I left the stove on? No, I hadn't cooked in days. My laptop? No, it was in my bag, thrown onto the passenger seat in my usual morning autopilot. Then what? My phone rang, vibrating against the plastic cup holder. The number flashed on the screen. Unknown. But I knew better. Bill collectors. I clenched my jaw before answering, already bracing myself. Hello? A voice on the other end rattled off my name, their tone all business, all demand. We're calling about your outstanding balance. I exhaled sharply, my frustration boiling over. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I just forgot? I'm sitting in traffic, wasting my life away every single day to make barely enough to survive. And you think I magically have money for you? Tell me, how am I supposed to pay you when I can't even afford to live? Silence. A pause. Then the collector launched into their script again, as if my words meant nothing. I hung up. Hard. The phone clattered onto the seat, and I turned the music up. Loud. A mix of music and Spotify affirmations played in an endless loop. You are strong. You are capable, a voice repeated. But the words felt hollow against the weight pressing down on me. I switched back to music, something loud enough to drown it all out. But after a few minutes, I found myself back on the affirmations, searching for something, anything that might stick. You are in control of your life, the voice insisted. I scoffed, flipping back to music again. The bass thumped through my chest, rattling through my bones, drowning out the rage, the helplessness, the crushing weight of it all. I shook the feeling off and pressed forward. But the thought gnawed at me, creeping into the corners of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. The traffic slowed, locking me into a dead stop between exits. I drummed my fingers against the wheel, the silence growing unbearable. Something was wrong. Something was missing. The air inside the car felt heavier now, oppressive. I adjusted my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of my own eyes, shadowed and hollow. Was it always this way? Was I always this way? The weight of exhaustion bore down on me. My limbs felt heavier than they should. Had I slept enough last night? Had I ever slept enough? I closed my eyes, taking slow, steady breaths. But when I opened them, the scenery outside seemed different. The colors muted, the sounds dampened. My vision blurred for a moment before snapping back into focus. But the creeping unease remained. I was losing time. One moment, I was at the interchange, and the next, I was pulling into the parking garage beneath my office building. My heart pounded as I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady, as if I had forgotten how to walk. The air felt wrong, too thick, too still. I moved through the lobby, the fluorescent lights above buzzing softly, pressing against my skull like a dull migraine. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped inside. The mirrored walls reflected me back at myself, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something else. A blur, a shadow of someone who wasn't quite me. I blinked, and it was gone. The doors opened to my floor, and I walked down the sterile hallway, my footsteps muffled against the carpet. My hands were cold, my breath shallow. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to run, but my body moved forward, as if caught in the undertow of a dream. I reached my office door, hesitated, then turned the knob. The room was dark. The air smelled of familiarity, of something deeply personal. My breath hitched as I took a step inside, and the walls expanded, morphing, shifting. No, I wasn't at the office. I was home. My bedroom lay before me, unchanged and untouched, as if I had never left. My unmade bed, the half-empty coffee cup on my nightstand, the soft hum of the city outside my window. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. How? I had driven here. I had spent an hour in traffic. I had been walking into my office just moments ago. I turned, reaching for the door, but when I opened it, there was no hallway, just the same road, the same endless stretch of the 405. My hands trembled as I turned back toward my room, only to find it dissolving around me, slipping through my fingers like sand. And then I was back in my car. Traffic had barely moved. The radio played the same mindless chatter, and the clock on my dashboard blinked mockingly. 7:45 a.m., just like it always was. I let out a shaky breath, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My skin felt cold. My pulse raced. What was real? Where had I been? And then the realization hit me. I was late. I was still home, still in bed, still asleep. The panic rose, clawing up my throat as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to check the time, to wake myself up. But when I looked down, my hands weren't there. The car, the traffic, the drive, it wasn't real. I never left my bed. I was still dreaming, or living a nightmare, over and over. The next story will begin now. The mysterious painting. After pushing back from its gate, the Swiss Air midday flight to New York moved slowly through a light snow flurry to its designated runway. The first-class cabin was less than half full. The passenger in 1A was pleased there was no one opposite. A smiling cabin crew offered him a glass of champagne. He declined, asking for double single malt. He thought about the voicemail, a somewhat guarded call, coming from someone he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. What drove his final response was the email attachment that followed. He'd tried retuning the call, but it went to voicemail. He sensed something was wrong. He'd barely had time to return to his apartment from where he'd been staying, find his passport, pack a new bag, and take his car service to the airport. Something was telling him missing the flight was not an option. Philippe Abano was an internationally recognized art specialist, having spent 35 years researching the French Impressionists, a group of artists whose collective works, long after their passing, at auction, would shake the art world to its foundations. As with many famous artists, there were finished canvases, although documented, which had never been located. The Nazi art plunder, which began in Germany in 1933, contributed to the loss of artworks across Europe. The French Impressionists were not exempt from this pillage. 48 hours previous, Marie Le Pen was an art restorer. She worked almost exclusively for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specializing in the restoration of damaged watercolors. On occasion, she did private restoration. With the museum's knowledge, she'd taken a call from a person representing a Mr. Retzlaff, saying she'd been recommended by her superior at the museum as someone to inspect a damaged watercolor he possessed. Marie, who loved her work, agreed to view the painting. She agreed a time the following day. Mr. Retzlaff would send a car. Very swish, she thought. After offloading her bags from the limousine sent for her, she looked around. The street was amazing. Narrow with private residences, no commercial properties. The houses all appeared to be of similar build, 5 or 6 floors above ground, with basements or walk-downs. Every property was maintained like new. Flowers and trees adorned the street. There was no garbage and no graffiti. The residence they stopped in front of was impressive, with red brick and huge floor-to-ceiling windows, edged with carved stone. At roof level, gargoyles peered down, surveying the scene. This was a part of New York most people would never see. Amazing. She followed the driver up the marble steps. He pulled on the brass handle and returned to the car. A man wearing a bow tie and black trousers answered. "Yes, madam?" he inquired. "I'm Marie Le Pen. I believe you're expecting me?" She smiled. "We are indeed, madam," the stern-faced man replied. The entrance hall was huge. She could smell timber and brass polish. The black and white checkered tiled floor was straight out of an English TV series. The doors leading off the foyer were all closed. A majestic, sweeping staircase held sway over the entrance. Huge brass vases, once filled with flowers, stood empty either side of the entrance. Apart from the electric light, the only modern consideration was a mechanical elevator. "Please," the man gestured, "follow me." They entered the elevator, along with her baggage. Marie watched as the man pressed 5. The door closed, and they began their ascent. On the 5th floor was another vestibule. This one had more polished timber and huge windows onto the street below. "This way." He gestured, then walked along a long corridor before he opened a large double door into what looked like a series of smaller spaces. If Marie hadn't had complete faith in her boss, she'd have been scared. At one side of the room, a man sat, straight-backed, with silver-gray hair. She guessed at least late 80s, wearing a green corduroy smoking jacket. He stood. She could smell cigar smoke. "Thank you for coming. I'm Peter Retzlaff. Fact is, Miss Le Pen, I need an expert opinion as to a certain painting that is in my possession. Should I, or should I not, restore it. Your superior at the Met spoke most highly of you. Marie saw several large art tables, specialist seats, and an array of instruments, all designed specifically for art restoration. She was gobsmacked. There had to be $1 million in equipment and instruments, brand new, some still in their original packaging, just sitting there. The old man waved his hand, and the valet unlocked a large steel cabinet with racks of what looked to Maria like canvases, painted canvases in various stages of decomposition. Strange, she thought. He slid one of the racks out and removed a painting, a watercolor that Maria recognized. After putting on her smock and gloves, examined the item more closely. Behind her, a phone rang. The valet took a cell phone from his pocket and listened, then said something softly to the old man. They stepped away to the side of the room, out of earshot. Maria continued looking at the canvas, heavily water damaged with a once grand frame that also appeared flawed. She was about to make some preliminary notes into her phone. As she moved around the table, a splash of red caught her eye. The steel cabinet, which held the damaged painting, was open on one side. What she saw made her heart stand still. It was a large canvas of what appeared to be small wooden bridge over water in a garden. Although no expert, she'd seen enough examples of French impressionistic work to know this could be one. Marie quickly turned her phone to camera, taking 2 quick shots, only to be interrupted by raised voices. The old man was saying something to the valet in what sounded like German, who dashed past her, securing the door to the cabinet. Ending her view, she said nothing, returning to the recorder in her phone, her head down, trying to appear as though she was concentrating. The old man looked suspiciously at her, said nothing. She could feel his eyes. My God, what have you just seen? She asked herself. Maria spent the next 2 hours making notes and photographing the damage. She agreed to return the following day with her recommendations and estimates, should she consider it restorable. Retzlaff agreed, giving her a copy of a providence document relating to the painting, which she would need to study. He told her he would send a car for her at an agreed time. She shook his hand and returned to the waiting limousine. The previous 2 hours did not sit well with her. Quite why, she couldn't say. The images of the red canvas wouldn't leave her. The storm had hit with a vengeance. Sudden spring rain washing the roadways, reminding New Yorkers summer was not far away. The crowded eateries on the streets of the East Village were suddenly deserted, sending outside diners scrambling for shelter inside. From her small single-bed apartment off McDougal Street, above a drugstore, Maria sat looking at the 2 images she downloaded from her camera. The room was quiet, save for the rhythm of the rain tapping at her window. On the larger screen, she could see more clearly the image she'd snapped earlier. The images were very much French impressionistic, of the late 19th or early 20th century. She could see the attempt to produce work inspired by real life. It was revolutionary. French impressionist artists rejected classical subject matter in favor of modernity, seeking to produce works that represented their current circumstances and environments. The more she looked, the more she was convinced. It was what she suspected. "My God," she exclaimed. "Could it be a Monet, hidden in a steel cabinet in a residence on the Upper West Side?" It would explain the old man's annoyance at the cabinet being left open, particularly in the presence of a third party who just happened to be an art restoration expert. Maria took stock, pouring another glass of wine, wondering what she should do next. She thought about the man who had mentored her 15 years ago at Switzerland's largest art museum, the Kunsthaus Zurich, Philippe Abano. If anyone could make sense on what she had seen, he could. She'd not had any contact with Philippe for over a decade. Now he worked in a private capacity, advising galleries and writing books on the subject of French art, in particular, French Impressionism. His web page provided email and phone contact details. Maria thought carefully as how she should frame the call without identifying the object. Before she made the call, she uploaded the 2 photographs into a separate folder, attaching it to the email address she had for Philippe Abano. Suspecting the call would go to voicemail, she'd prepared a statement. At 10:30 p.m., she made the call, voicemail. She introduced herself, telling him of her current position at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, reminding him of their previous association, how she'd come to see what she'd seen, making no reference to a place or names, asking him for his opinion as to the images attached to the following email. Finishing the call, she pressed the send button. In the street below, a man sat in a black limousine, its wipers on intermittent sweeps, clearing the spitting rain, watching the illuminated small window above the drugstore. The Swiss Air flight gathered speed as it approached its takeoff point at Zurich Airport. Food and service trolleys rattled in their compartments as the aircraft's nose finally lifted into a gray, overcast day, the engines screaming. Philippe Abano was anxious and at the same time nervous, processing what he'd heard and seen in the previous few hours from one Maria Le Pen. Once the pilot had removed the seatbelt sign, he reached for his laptop. Putting on his glasses, began his search. East Village, New York City. Detectives Allison Maroney and her partner, Alex Sonny, stood at the open door of 1A, the apartment above the drugstore in the East Village. They flashed their shields at the uniform on the door. "What we got?" Allison inquired. The uniformed officer's badges read Lomax. "So, Officer Lomax, talk to us." The officer opened his notebook. A deceased female, found dead after we gained entry, possible gunshot. A Miss Holland. He gestured upwards. In 2A, reported a cat calling and scratching at the deceased's door. Apparently, the tenant regularly let her cat out when she came home from work, and then opened up when Pussy wanted in. Except, this time, no response. Cat keeps calling. She, Miss Holland, knocked. Nothing. As she heard the tenant arrive earlier that evening, she was reluctant to use the spare key she had, deciding to call 911 instead. We attended. The cat was still scratching at the door. Miss Holland gave us the key and witnessed a non-forced entry. We discovered the body and called the station, securing the scene. The ME, who arrived shortly after we called it in, puts time of death at around 8 p.m., give or take. Pulling on latex gloves, Detective Maroney knelt next to the body. ID? Yes. A wallet with cash and cards. A Maria Le Pen, 37, works at the Metropolitan Museum as an art restorer. ID shows her address as here. No driver's license. Detective Sunny moved carefully around the small room. Laptop? Cell? Neither, though I'm guessing she had both. They're chargers for each in here and in the bedroom. To recap, Sunny offers. No phone, no laptop, nothing taken except said cell and computer. Not a robbery then, and no sign of a forced entry. Sunny looked at his partner skeptically, shrugging his huge shoulders. Single gunshot between the eyes, small caliber, maybe .22. Very professional. This look like a hit to me, Maroney offered. What do you think? After 3 hours of intense in-flight investigation, Philippe Abano concluded it was a work by Claude Monet, albeit a later work. His once subtle transitions between shades became bolder and less precise, reflecting the challenges posed by his deteriorating eyesight. Monet's health struggles extended beyond his eyes, but his vision loss had the most direct impact on his art. And it was this Philippe Abano recognized. He'd even found a reference to a non-catalogued work titled Pont sur l'eau bleue, Bridge over Blue Water. It was listed as one of several, being prepared by Monet's agent for exhibit in Paris. The exhibition never eventuated, the listed paintings unaccounted for. This was no great mystery for Armand. A number of explanations could be found. The artist withdrew the works, no reason given. An issue with the gallery, or sold before exhibition. The latter Armand found more convincing. It would also explain its anonymity for over a century, a private or family collection that may have suffered at the hands of the Nazi art plunder of the 30s. The whereabouts of many were still unknown. Either way, a mystery that may well be explained when he was to meet with Maria Le Pen in 4 hours' time. We think it's over, but in fact, it's just begun. The next story will thrill you in a completely different way. The Demon in the Portrait. Denise Gray looked away from her reflection in the store window. The sight of that perfectly proportioned young body only served to remind her of the curse. As a young woman, she'd posed for an enigmatic artist who had painted her picture while spinning words that were at once wonderful and frightening. It hadn't been long after that she learned the reality of the painting and its associated curse. One day, she was accosted by a thief. And before she realized what was happening, he had run a dagger through her heart. She cringed, but when the thief pulled the knife out, there was no blood where she had been stabbed. A swift kick to the groin sent him running, but when she opened her now ruined blouse, she realized that she was unharmed, not even a scratch. Denise thought about it and realized that her situation was like a story her mother had told her, called The Painting of Dorian Gray. "Damn," she whispered as she scraped her knee on a large rock that she'd brushed against, only to look down and realize that her forever young body was still unharmed. She realized that she would have to return to the artist's studio. And if that painting was damaged, she would have to force the artist to find a way to lift the curse without killing her before her time. When she returned to confront the artist, she found him hanging in his studio, dead. Her search for the painting in his studio was in vain, and it was only after another attack that she realized the truth of the curse. The knife had pierced her heart, but again, she felt no pain after the knife had been pulled from her chest. She tracked the painting down to a gallery in a distant town, only to watch the painting destroyed by fire as the gallery burned to the ground, killing the hundreds of people inside. She'd spent many hours waiting for the death that never came. After that, she tried every means of killing herself, but to no avail. Finally, she felt a glimmer of hope as she learned of a book of paintings that had a copy of her painting in it. That book was rumored to be in this tiny library. She took a deep breath as she approached the tiny library. She knew she had to do something, or she would go insane from not being able to die. Denise had arrived just as Jessie had left the library and moved toward the tavern. An hour while the poor, pregnant librarian took lunch wouldn't make a lot of difference, she thought, as she sat down on a nearby bench. She smiled as a group of children ran by. One little brown-eyed girl stopped and smiled back, then ran to join her friends. "The book you want is here," Jessie said, "but you may be disappointed. The book is a manual for destroying demons." "I don't feel like a demon," Denise said. Jessie slid the leather hand-bound book toward Denise. "What happens if I open it?" Jessie shrugged. "I haven't read that far." Denise felt a tingling race up her arm as she pulled the book toward herself. What if she got sucked into the book when she opened it? She looked down at her ruined blouse. She'd neglected to change the blouse even though she had another in her small travel bag. Throwing caution to the wind, she opened the book. Being stuck in the book would be no worse than not being able to kill herself. The first thing she saw was a horrible version of herself. Her hair was singed, and every injury she'd sustained in getting there had scarred over. When she could finally pull her eyes away from the picture, she began to read. The demon her painting had become had spoken from the painting and convinced the artist to hang himself. Then she had started the fire that destroyed the original painting, killing all the people there for the unveiling. Denise slammed the book closed. The pull of the woman in the painting was more than she could stand. "Are you affected as well?" Denise asked, only to be met by a blank stare from Jessie. A few moments later, her unborn child, kicking wildly, stirred Jessie back to life. "We have to destroy the book," Denise said. Jessie shook her head. "She will take us all with her." Denise slammed her hand down on the book before Jessie could open it. "That's exactly what she wants you to think. But trust me," Jessie's unborn baby kicked so hard that she gasped. "I can't help you. I'll take care of it," Denise said, taking the book and leaving the library. Denise counted herself lucky that the tiny library was on a small tropical island with an active volcano. It would only take her half a day to get to the volcano cone, light the book on fire, and drop it into the liquid lava below. She only hoped that would be enough. As she moved toward the volcano, the book and the demon it contained recognized her intent. "Hand over that book," the huge Polynesian man standing in her way said, his gun drawn. On some level, Denise knew that the man was under the influence of the demon. She ran around him and felt the bullet from his gun rip through the ruined blouse and on through her right shoulder. By the time she reached the trail at the edge of the volcano, she could feel the demon trying to stop her. Branches and thorns reached out for her, only to rip more holes in her ruined blouse as she ran toward the summit. Finally, she reached the edge of the cauldron and the bubbling lava below. "No!" The sound of the wind and the rush of the heat shouted as the edges of the book began to smoke. The book burst into flames as she tossed the book toward the lava. It hung suspended above the lava, flaming bigger and brighter, but without being consumed. Suddenly, she noticed that the young girl she'd seen before had caught up to her. "It's drawing power from your blouse." Denise shook her head. None of this made sense. The blouse had taken the brunt of the damage inflicted on her and was ragged and full of holes. "You have to destroy the blouse as well," the girl said, before racing away from the lip. At the bottom of the trail, she saw the other children blocking the way of the adults who were under the influence of the book. Denise turned to see flame explode from the book and realized that she had no choice. If destroying the blouse didn't work, she would have to offer herself to the volcano. But this glimmer of hope had given her a reason to live. She pulled the remains of that ruined blouse off and threw it down at the boiling lava below. The atmosphere around the book howled in rage as the blouse fluttered to the surface of the lava and then burst into flames. The book exploded, scattering burning ash over everything. Before Denise could react, the same young girl was pulling her away from the lip of the cauldron. She stumbled into the group and children, and then her world went black. Denise remembered that blouse as the one that the artist had insisted she wear while he worked on the painting. What happened after that was a blur until that book exploded over the cauldron. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes to the soft light of the sun coming in through the curtains of a cottage near the ocean. It was a dream, she thought, until she realized that she wasn't wearing the blouse anymore. The painting and the book had been destroyed, but she didn't know about the curse. She inspected her body and then wrapped a sheet around her till she could find some clothes. Denise opened the door and saw children playing in front of the cottage, then stepped onto the porch and noticed a thorny bush near the steps into the yard. She idly pricked her finger and gave a sigh of relief as she realized that the curse was gone when a tiny drop of blood formed on her finger. "The children told us how you saved us," Jessie said as she approached from the side yard. Denise shrugged. "I needed to be free of the curse," Jess smiled. "The children like having you around, and we are in the market for school teacher." Denise had never considered anything like this. She'd been so young when the nightmare started. She looked down. Her body was still young, and if the kids had trusted her, maybe she could try. It beats modeling, she thought, as she followed Jessie back toward the cottage. Cornflower blues. It always came at night. That night was no different in that respect. I had heard it lumbering around outside as the sun disappeared from the sky, the sound of scraping metal as it circled the house. I had always fought the urge to look directly at it, instead only catching glimpses of it in the shadows. If I focused, I could shuffle it to the back of my mind like a deck of cards. But those lonely hours, when night approached and my mind was no longer engaged by work or meaningless check-ins with the few friends I managed to keep, were the hardest. At first, the check-ins came daily, then weekly, then monthly, then whenever they had a free second to pity me via text. "Hey girl, you doing okay? Do you need anything?" I don't think any of them would have known what to do had I answered yes. I couldn't blame them though. Life goes on, for some people at least. But anyway, the difference in this particular night was that I had decided to allow my mind to go to that place. No shuffling this time. Instead, accepting the cards that were dealt. Sometime after my 5th or 6th glass of Pinot Noir, I turned my phone off, placed it on the end table next to a stack of unpaid bills, pushed the dirty clothes to one end of the couch, and sank into the other end. Alone. It had been 12 months to the day since I lost my sweet boy with the cornflower blue eyes. Cornflower Connie, as I called him. Parents should never have to bury their children. Todd was completely shattered. He left me this past June. I had dropped to a rail-thin 99 pounds, and he said he couldn't stand to see me hurt any longer. I tried everything: counseling, group, rehabilitation programs, but everyone grieves differently. I guess Todd had to grieve alone. At some point, I nodded off, waking only to an unsettling silence, quickly realizing the noise was gone. I wiped the drool from my chin, licked my cracked lips, and decided to check it out. With my body bladed to the window, I pulled the curtain to the side and saw it standing under the dim porch light. The back of my neck tingled, and my heart thumped in my chest, acting like my body's panic alarm. I would normally just do a quick look. Instead, for the first time, I stayed. I studied it. Its skin was the color of burnt charcoal, and its back curved like a question mark. It shifted under the light, revealing a Grinch-like face that scrunched even more as it smiled at me, like a mischievous feline. But there, above the unnerving grin, I saw them, those familiar eyes. My cornflower Connie had come home. All I had to do was focus on those eyes. Don't you want to be with me again, Mommy? Let me in, and you can hold me again, just like you used to. What was I supposed to do? Of course, I wanted to be with him again. It would surely be better than telling myself that the random white blob in the sky actually resembled a heart. A message from my Connie. I love you too. Yeah, you can convince yourself of almost anything if you believe it enough, and if you're sad enough, just like the cardinal that occasionally lands on my fence. Good morning, Connie. Thanks for the visit. I let him in. His long, rubbery fingers took me by the arm, led me upstairs, never breaking his gaze. Where are we going? I asked, barely a whisper, in what seemed like the first words I had spoken in days. To my room, Mommy. The door creaked open, and the lights came on, bringing the room back to life. I have no idea if I flipped the switch or not. It felt like I had floated up the staircase. The room was just as he left it. COONRD, colorfully stenciled on the blue wall above his big boy twin bed. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sheets and comforter still ruffled from that night a little over a year ago, when he stumbled into our room just before midnight. Mommy, my chest feels weird, he moaned. After a 104.1 fever, we rushed him to the hospital. My cornflower Connie would never come home again. His fingers rolled up my sleeve and led me to the bed. I pressed his Michelangelo stuffed animal to my face, inhaling deeply, hoping it still held Connie's scent. It didn't. The tears fell, and his grip tightened on my arm, leading me into the bed. He never let go of my arm. "Lay with me, Mommy." I climbed in, pulled the covers to my stomach, and rested my head on Connie's pillow. "I miss you so much, baby," I yelled through tears, pounding my one free fist on the mattress. "I'm here if you keep looking in my eyes." Just then, his eyes flickered, and as if I was watching a projection screen. I watched as we took in the afternoon show of the new Spider-Man movie last year. Connie's lap littered with buttery popcorn that missed his mouth, his icy stained lips framing his checkered smile. A flicker, a summer afternoon drive around the neighborhood, blasting random 90s songs. He loved the songs that I grew up on. We would do our absolute worst to sing along. "Keep looking at my eyes, Mommy. Just a little bit more, until you can hold me again." His grip tightened some more. Another flicker, a lazy Sunday. Me sprawled out on the couch, my Connie's little body slowly rising and falling with my breathing as he naps on my chest. Another second, and I'm yours again. How could I say no? I did what he asked, just a little longer. The avalanche of warmth I felt was euphoric, as if my insides were swaddled in a heated blanket. It was the first semblance of comfort and peace that I hadn't felt since he was actually here with me. I did what he asked. Then I waited. That was 2 days ago, and I don't see my Cornflower Connie anywhere. The comfort I had felt the other day dissipated in an instant. I've been patiently waiting, but now I wonder, did it lie? It's so dark here. Thank you for being here to listen with me. Let's enjoy the new story together. The Painter of Souls. It was the first time in 2 years that the group of friends had reunited for this trip. After many cancellations and unfinished plans, everyone had made an effort to make this outing a reality. They hadn't spoken much during the funeral 2 years ago, and it almost seemed as if their friendship would dissolve soon after. But through the video game chats they frequented, nostalgia and good memories rekindled the bonds that had weakened with the loss. They talked about how competitive Bennett had been in many of the games they played, how he would ask for rematches multiple times, failure after failure. They spoke about how he would have wanted them to spend time remembering him, just like this, with laughter and anecdotes. The 3 of them went from contacting each other through video game chats to messaging on their phones and making video calls. "We should go on the trip," Arlo had suggested one day during one of their group calls. There was a long silence before Thiago said, "Do you mean?" "Yes," Arlo confirmed. The travel plan Bennett shared days before. "Before what happened? Are you sure?" Roman asked. It was his idea, and he was the most excited about it. We never understood what had motivated him so much to organize this trip. He wanted us to meet someone, Arlo said. That's the only thing I remember. Someone in the middle of the rainforest? Thiago inquired. Well, it was also a sightseeing trip around the city, and a chance to visit many of the famous archaeological exhibitions in the area. The museums, too, added Arlo, who had, in fact, graduated in art history. And what about the person you said he wanted to find? Roman asked. I suppose we don't have enough information to look into that, Arlo observed. That's why I suggest we take the trip in his honor and try to enjoy it as the four of us would have. You know? That's not a bad idea, Thiago said, encouraged. I could use a holiday. I need to get out of here. An excuse to take a break from my business. And when was the last time we traveled together? Roman added. Let's do it. Just like that. The three of them made their preparations for the trip on the following weeks. They looked up information about their destination and its tourist attractions, paid for their plane tickets, and agreed to meet at the airport 2 hours before the flight. On his way to the airport, Arlo had decided to stop by Bennett's house. He knocked on the door, and it was Bennett's mother who answered. The woman looked at him in surprise, but she immediately moved to hug him once she recognized him. My goodness, Arlo, it's been so long. I wasn't expecting to see you after the funeral. Come in, come in. She invited him inside. They entered the living room, where photos of Bennett with his siblings and parents filled every corner of the room. Arlo avoided looking at them as his mother offered him a seat. No, thank you. He smiled politely. I was just passing by to let you know that I'm going on a trip. Actually, the three of us are going. It's a plan Bennett shared with us before he left. The woman nodded, perfectly understanding what he meant. Yes, the trip. He wouldn't stop talking about it. I'm so glad the three of you have decided to go. Bennett would be so happy to know this. I know, Arlo sighed. I know we haven't spoken to you since the funeral. We tried to reach out, but it was very difficult. I understand, Arlo, she said, placing a comforting hand on his arm. I just wanted to stop by to tell you about our plans in person, and also to see his room one last time. I hope that's not too intrusive a request. I just needed to see the last space he was in. The woman nodded again, understandingly. It's not intrusive at all. Go ahead, you can go in. To be honest, it's a relief to have someone else in that room, even if only for a few minutes. My husband and I are starting to feel the deep silence coming from it. His mother remained in the living room, while Arlo climbed the stairs to the room. He opened the door, and immediately, the unmistakable scent of Bennett's deodorant reached his nostrils, mixed with the smell of a closed-up room and the dust floating from the shelves. Most of his belongings and clothes were packed away in boxes that the family would donate to charity, but the posters and printed images on the walls had not yet been taken down. Arlo stepped closer to observe them carefully. Bennett used to draw a lot in his spare time. Despite having graduated in computer science and cybersecurity, his true passion had been drawing and sketching, something he had dedicated himself to in his free time, both inside and outside of university. On the wall were drawings that seemed to depict them, the group of friends, peculiarly colored in primary colors. In some drawings, Roman and Thiago were shaded in pink tones. In others, a slightly more purple hue. Bennett himself was shaded in gray. Arlo was always painted in red. Arlo gazed at the drawings with resentment, holding back the urge to tear the paper from the wall. During the first 2 days at their destination, the three friends spent their time at the 4-star hotel they had booked. When Arlo suggested going to the city center to explore, the other two sighed in annoyance. "We have a week and a half to explore whatever you want," said Thiago, still wrapped in his sheets. "We won't have the chance to enjoy this level of luxury once these holidays are over. You're the one finishing a PhD in history and art, Arlo. You can go without us," added Roman as he put on his swimming trunks. Getting ready to head to the pool, Arlo irritably reminded them, "This trip is for Bennett. You know he would have wanted to see the exhibitions and museums. You've been saying that for weeks," Roman retorted, turning to face him. What's with the sudden interest in what he wanted to explore? If I remember correctly, you always ignored all the drawings and paintings he tried to share with us. Now Thiago sat up on the bed, watching his friends as they confronted each other. "What's gotten into you, Roman?" Arlo asked. "I don't know. Why are you making us feel like you're the one who cares the most about his death and his final wishes? We mourn his loss too. Don't try to act like you're above us with your false moral code." Arlo simply pulled a small, crumpled note from his pocket and shoved it in Roman's face. This is the place he wanted to visit, along with the name of the person he wanted to see. Roman snatched the paper to read it himself. Thiago got up to take a look as well and asked, "Was this what you went to get from his house?" Avoiding the question, Arlo said, "I'm not trying to impose some false moral code on you. It's normal to feel guilt, but the best thing we can do is show a bit of interest in what he loved. That's all I'm trying to do." With that, he left the room. Thiago and Roman exchanged uneasy glances. "I have no idea what's going through his head," said Roman. Thiago shrugged, though his expression remained troubled. "You heard what he said. It's normal to feel guilt. I'm sure he's going through the same thing." An hour later, the three of them made their way into the city, stopping by the tourist spots they had planned in advance. This time, however, the excitement they had initially felt for the trip was gone. A sense of impending doom loomed over them, and there was nothing they could do to dispel it. All of a sudden, what had been a journey in memory of their friend was being exposed as the farce they had tried to mask with that ridiculous excuse. The last place left to visit was the shop. It was an art shop. From the outside, it had that vintage aesthetic that attracted art lovers looking for something unique and different. Something timeless, stuck in time. The three entered cautiously. The shop was empty, and the light streaming through the glass windows fell upon the golden and bronze frames of the various paintings hanging and stacked everywhere. All the paintings depicted people, some in groups, others alone. At first glance, they seemed like photographs, edited in different colors, but upon closer inspection, one could appreciate the hand-drawn strokes and the pigment of watercolors and oil paint. The style of these paintings looks familiar, Thiago murmured. Without much enthusiasm, Roman nodded. Yeah, this is exactly how Bennett used to draw. The characters in the paintings were painted monochromatically. Each person in each painting had a certain tone of color assigned to them. Some colors were more intense than others. Background characters in landscapes or scenes were usually depicted in different shades of gray. In portraits, many were also colored in gray. The three had been so absorbed in the artwork that they hadn't noticed the man who had approached them to greet them. Greetings, he said. The group startled and turned their attention to him. The shop owner wasn't as old as they had expected. He was likely in his mid-30s. He dressed just like one of them, except for the paint-stained apron he wore. His eyes were a peculiar silver color that stood out in the dim light of the shop. We're looking for Keita, Arlo stated. That's me, the man confirmed, pointing to himself. His strong West African accent was evident in his words. I've been expecting you. Did Bennett talk to you about us? Thiago stammered. With a rather calm demeanor, Keita tilted his head as if the answer was somewhat complicated. He spoke to me about you the first time he came here. But that was also the last time I ever saw him, he said, turning to search through a stack of paintings behind him. Carefully, he pulled one out. Exactly 2 years ago. This is what I painted. Keita placed the painting in front of them. Roman paled at the sight of it. Thiago still couldn't understand, and Arlo remained silent, pressing his lips together. The painting was a reproduction of a real photo. The four of them had taken 3 years ago on a road trip to the mountains. The picture had been taken with a camera set on a tripod. However, in this painting, only Arlo, Roman, and Thiago smiled at the camera, standing in front of a rocky landscape with waterfalls cascading into a lake. Bennett appeared as a gray shadow in the background, at the edge of the lake, a few meters away from them. Beside him, another gray figure crouched at Bennett's feet, as if crying. It looked like the figure of a woman. In the painting, Arlo was colored in a deep red, while Thiago and Roman were shades of maroon. Where did you get this from? Arlo demanded. From the truth, Keita answered. You guys remember exactly what happened that day, don't you? No one answered. The silence itself was confirmation. I can see the color of your souls from miles and miles away, the artist continued. I don't need to know you to start painting what each of you inspires in me." His tone became more accusatory as he went on. "Bennett had this gift too. He came to me because he wanted to learn more about it. And you, Arlo, you knew that." Roman turned to Arlo, stunned by such information. "Yet you made him self-medicate with drugs so he would lose his mind and end up taking his own life," Kata continued. "I didn't want Bennett to die," Arlo protested, raising his voice. For the first time in years, he seemed to be losing his composure. "I just wanted him to forget and stop painting those damn drawings. He was going to get us in trouble." "You wanted him to forget her?" Kata asked. He walked over to his desk and picked up some drawings, this time on notebook paper, traced by a different hand. "Bennett gave me these during his last visit." Thiago held them in his hands. Upon seeing the frantic sketches of a cadaverous woman in black, gray, and green colors, he gasped, "My God!" and let the sheets fall to the floor in shock. "No one bothered to pick them up. She was on the way," Roman murmured, as if talking to himself, as if justifying it to himself. "She came out from between the trees like a mad woman. That's why we hit her with the car. She fell into the lake, and there was nothing else we could do," Thiago exclaimed desperately. "Why jump into the lake to retrieve a body that was already lifeless?" All that Arlo said to Kata was, "What do you plan to do with all of this? Send it to the police?" At the absurdity of his question, Kata replied, "I am not in charge of the punishment of men. Justice will be served, but not by me." His silver eyes gleamed as he spoke. "Just keep in mind that now 2 souls are tied to your fate." As soon as they left the place, the 3 of them didn't say a word to each other until they reached the hotel. The following day, each took their flight back home. In the following months, Thiago turned himself in to the police as an accomplice in the cover-up of the hit and run. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. When the police interrogated Roman, he revealed that although they were all drunk at the time of the incident, it was Arlo who was driving the car and who suggested they continue the trip. Roman was facing 2 years in prison. No one knew of Arlo's whereabouts. He seemed to have moved and changed his name. The authorities did what they could to search for him. But since the victim had been someone suffering from a mental illness and had run away from her own home, and therefore had little family who could report her disappearance, except for a sister, they were content with having 2 guilty individuals in prison and letting the one who escaped go free. Months after all of this, in their respective cells, Roman and Thiago received a letter in a brown envelope. The letter consisted of a pencil-drawn illustration showing Arlo drowning in a lake of skulls. The lake was the only part painted in a deep red, like blood. So today's story has come to an end. Or perhaps it never really ended. There are mysteries still there, questions still unanswered, and sometimes things that seem to only exist in stories can creep into reality in unexpected ways. Are you sure that when you turn off the sound, everything around you will still be normal as before? Or is there something watching you? Either way, always remember that these are just stories, or at least we want to believe that they are. If you like moments of suspense, tension, and breathlessness, don't forget to follow me so you don't miss the next stories. And next time, when you come back, make sure you are ready, because what awaits you may be even scarier than you thought. See you again if you still have the courage to continue listening.